Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 63. I would like to especially welcome our guest, Jonathan Bowden, if only, but as always, I'm going to start us off with a bit of a tune.
Oh, General Hill's gone to sea. Hey, boys, oh, boys. General Hill's gone to sea. Me jolly brave boys. General Hill's gone to sea, along with his brave company, along with the Sriracha militia boys. He set his course away for Spain. Hey, boys, oh, boys. Set his course away for Spain. Me jolly brave boys. He set his course away for Spain. Silver and gold for to gain, along with the Sriracha militia boys. Supposing we should meet the French. Hey, boys, oh, boys. Supposing we should meet the French. Me jolly brave boys. Supposing we should meet the French, or wouldn't we lead them an English dance, along with the Sriracha militia boys? He sailed out 500 men. Hey, boys, oh, boys. He sailed out 500 men. Me jolly brave boys. He sailed out 500 men. He brought back but 61. That's all of the Sriracha militia boys. And when we came to Blackwall, hey, boys, oh, boys. And when we came to Blackwall, me jolly brave boys. And when we came to Blackwall, our captain so loud did call, here comes the bold Sriracha militia boys. There's mothers crying for their sons. Hey, boys, oh, boys. And mothers crying for their sons. Me jolly brave boys. There's mothers crying for their sons. Wives for their husbands. That's laws from the Sriracha militia boys. Shrewsbury bells, they will ring. Hey, boys, oh, boys. Shrewsbury bells, they will ring. Me jolly brave boys. Shrewsbury bells, they will ring. When Lord Hill returns again, along with the Sriracha militia boys. So General Hill's gone to sea. Hey, boys, oh, boys. General Hill's gone to sea. Me jolly brave boys. General Hill's gone to sea, along with his brave company, along with the Sriracha militia boys.
Okay, that was a Shropshire song about General Sir Rowland Hill, who in the British Army was known as Daddy Hill by the troops because he looked after them so well. And he was one of Wellington's most competent military commanders in the Peninsular War, and one of the few who Wellington would actually trust to go and do stuff on his own, because he was not an idiot. He became the commander-in-chief of the British Army in the 1930s, I believe. Sorry, the 1820s, I beg your pardon. I was thinking about something else. Okay. Jonathan Bowden in chat. I'm only here for him. Where's Atterman? Atterman is working, mate. That's what Atterman's doing, as men have to do. So he's working this week. That's why he's not here. Okay, I'd like to say good evening to our guests this week so far, who are George and Rupert August. How are you going, George? How are you going, Rupert August?
I'm not too bad. Much as things were and much as things will be, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, doing well enough here.
Cool bananas. Cardamom in chat says he's distantly related to General Rowland Hill. Well, good on you, Cardamom. I'd be happy to be related to that chap. He was one of the best British generals in the Napoleonic Wars. So there we go. The militia boys, by the way, that is referred to in that song. The British government changed the rules. The militia were what would be called the reserves today, or what back in my day used to be called the Territorial Army. So they were part-time soldiers. And during the Napoleonic Wars, they changed the rules so that militia guys could actually volunteer to go into the regular forces. And that's what they're talking about in that song. So there we go. Okay, I'm going to do what we usually do and start us off with any particular subjects. And I'll probably start with Rupert today. Rupert, you got anything in particular you'd like to bring up just off the top of your head that you think might be interesting?
Mostly I've just been looking at the economic fallout from all of the, the tail end of the lockdown stuff, but more pressingly the present war, because of all the sanctions that may or may not go fully into force, and all of the consequences in the markets of that, because it's playing havoc with prices. And I think it might potentially cause some people to reassess how we structure our economies in a sort of like a geo-economic sort of sense, because it's caused us to have to reevaluate some things that we took for granted. I think I would think anyway.
Certainly the chairman of the Conservative Party at their conference has been saying that and I will say this in inverted commas, air quotes, the Conservative Party have been saying, the chairman of the Conservative Party in inverted commas, air quotes, has been saying that the government's going to walk back the insane and moronic net zero policy and are instead going to look at British oil and British gas and may even bring back fracking, all of which seem perfectly sensible to me in the
Well, yes, this
world.
is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about, because previously the situation has been not whether we would get energy, especially enough energy, but how we would get it and at what price. Whereas now we're potentially looking at a situation where the price will either be so high, or whether we could even get it in the first place because of lack of infrastructure for how we're trying to do it. It's not so much us. It's more Germany that could be hit by those kinds of problems, because they need particular port infrastructure to accept shipments of liquefied natural gas that they're otherwise not necessarily set up to accept. But there's all kinds of havoc potentially, because partially also due to this, due to the green policies and the net zero policies that you mentioned. But I mean, on the plus side, I hear it's making some more of the North Sea gas fields more viable, because obviously there's so much more profit to be made when the price is quadrupled or quintupled or whatever it is now.
Yeah. Look, to me, the watermelon green, because it's green on the outside, but like socialist, communist, red on the inside thing was always bollocks. So, yeah, I welcome everything that makes it less likely that British old age pensioners will die every winter because they can't afford to heat their homes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the other thing though is food. Because we, as I understand it, we did import a fair amount of wheat from Ukraine, which is not going to be viable in the immediate future. So,
well, Ukraine and Russia between them produce about 30% of the world's wheat, I believe, which is a very high proportion. And look, I don't know what you think, Rupert, but my opinion is that many of the sanctions that Western nations are putting on Russia are actually going to come back and bite us in the arse really hard. But I mean, that's just only my own opinion.
Oh, I definitely think that as well. The sanctions always work both ways, but I think we may realize that the extent that we're trying to, the extent of the pain that we're trying to inflict on them is going to be quite unconscionable on our side as well, especially for more fundamental things like food and heating, and the extent to which we're going to damage our own industry by being functionally unable to power it.
I mean, I'm reminded of that quote, "Some of you may die, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make."
Yes.
That sounds like either Napoleon or Lenin or Stalin.
Oh, it's actually from Shrek. But it's from Shrek, but it's still very applicable. Yeah, I mean that's just the entire thing, though, isn't it? It's basically you guys are gonna. This is horrible shit to happen to you guys, but I'm gonna let it happen because those dang Russians.
Yeah.
Oh, well. The greater good demands it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that, and I think we'll come back to that in a bit. Did you have something, George, that you wanted to bring up as a first topic?
Well, main things that have been happening, like the main things I've been focusing on this week, because I generally get a bit too fed up with current affairs to stop listening. There were two debates that happened this week that I thought were quite interesting. Not necessarily because I agreed with the debaters, but the fact that the conversations were happening and who was involved. So the first one was between Richard Spencer and an Australian.
Josh, somebody. Joel, third position guy.
Yeah, I think that's probably the generous way of putting it. And that was about imperialism versus nationalism, and I thought that was, it was interesting. I ended up not agreeing with either side really, but I definitely disagreed with Spencer more.
And then British imperialism was okay, but I'm not sure about anyone else's, to be honest. But I'm biased, I have to say.
What Spencer was basically saying is that imperialism is inevitable, and if you're not being the imperial power, then you're going to be part of someone else's thing. And I just don't.
Some truth.
I don't think it's true. I think that there has always been a way to escape a prevailing nation, so to speak, or at least I think so. But and the other one was Joel versus AA, in which AA actually surprisingly was on the offensive and basically saying we need to have a revolution, we need to clear people out. And Joel surprisingly was saying actually we need to have a positive vision.
Yeah, no, I watched that, George, and I have to say one of the best things I've ever seen on a stream was not very many minutes into that stream when Joel turned around and said to AA, unlike you, I don't have transvestites on my channel.
That was such.
Yeah, I thought that was Chad as hell, because I totally agree with him and I do the same thing.
And the fact that AA never got back to that shows that AA.
Yeah, he just shut up. He didn't say a word in reply because he couldn't.
He obviously has some moral problem one way or the other. It's absolutely fascinating to see. But so those are the two things.
I'm with you. I'm not a huge fan of Joel Davis, although I don't think he's an idiot, but I don't agree with him very much. That comment tipped him to made me on his side for most of the rest of that debate, and actually he won that debate as far as I'm concerned for the most part.
Oh yeah, AA in general is just not very good at debates, I found. Leading to another belief of mine that he's just not the smartest tool in the shed, sharpest tool in the shed. But I accept
he gets some things right. He's entertaining and he gets some things right. I disagree with him probably somewhere between 40 and 60% of the time, depending on what he's talking about.
Yeah, but that's just sort of those are sort of things that have been going on in my head. I haven't been looking at current affairs too much, because there's an extent to which I find current affairs these days unbelievably exhausting. There's always something to be angry about, and it's just not. It's not a good way to live.
Sure.
But yeah. So
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I look. The thing is that Britain could be much more energy independent than she is, with some common sense from the government. America could actually be an absolute energy exporter, but the government won't do that. And like when I look at stuff like that happening, and then them trying to stop other people using Russian gas and Russian oil and what have you, it just makes me think, hang on, there's something else going on here, you know?
Yeah, fundamentally, that's something I've noticed, is that when America is pushing this kind of thing so hard, because their incentives, especially long term, are so fundamentally opposed in this regard to those of Europe, because they don't face any kind of existential crisis for their industry if they are unable to get hold of like Russian oil, whereas potentially that's something that Germany could be looking at. Absolute worst case scenario.
Well, Germany certainly is. Germany's still buying huge quantities of Russian energy stuff in terms of gas and oil.
Exactly, but if America were to get their way, that wouldn't be happening, and Germany would be starving. But all the better for America, because that means an economic rival is knocked down.
Yeah. Look, one thing I want to get clear that I think we sometimes don't make clear is I think there is, and this goes for like Britain, it goes for every nation in the world, pretty much. There is a very huge difference between the British people and the British government. And I also think there's a huge difference between like the real American people and the current American government. I don't think they're synonymous at all.
I don't think they are either, but I would say that the American people in general have a inherently more liberal way of viewing the world than Europeans do.
Depends on which Americans you're talking to, George.
For me, the classic example, like you could take into account like this war. In Europe, intervention in Ukraine has been wholly unpopular, but in the United States, it is a popular sentiment.
Oh, hang on. Are you sure about that? Because you wouldn't get that impression from the MSM, would you?
You don't. I mean, who cares what the MSM genuinely thinks?
Yeah, me too. But yeah.
In Europe, no, it is a popular circumstance in Europe to oppose intervention, and it's also a popular disposition in America to favor intervention. Like that's like the polls, both Republicans and Democrats in the United States favor supporting Ukraine, and in Europe, most people are genuinely ambivalent about it. And like, I personally am of the view that the United States does this because the United States currently still views themselves as like the empire of liberalism, and Europe doesn't view themselves as I think an American probably views himself as either a liberal or conservative, in quotes, before they view themselves as, say, how might we say, like a flesh and blood ethnic person, like trying to they don't believe in the American empire, they believe in the liberal empire, should we say, as opposed to the British person who doesn't believe in a liberal empire, they believe in Britain. Sounds kind of convoluted, but
yeah, no, I entirely get what you're saying. I'm just not sure I totally agree with it. Like, I think there are many people in Britain, particularly upper middle class people, who are totally liberal lefties, actually, because people who are called liberals these days are really mostly lefties, to be honest. Whereas I think there are a lot of people in the flyover states in America who are still a bit more base than that. But I don't know. It's only my opinion. I'm well be wrong, but that's just what I think.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit like I know damn well that in the counties of England away from the big cities, the people are much more based than they are in places like London and Birmingham. And in Scotland, people are much more based in the Highlands and Islands than they are in places like Edinburgh or Glasgow. So I know that to be true, and I strongly suspect pretty much the same thing is true in Australia. Like, you know, in the middle of Melbourne, yeah, you're going to find a lot of soy boys and feminists and bug men. But if you go out into the countryside, that thing dies off very quickly. And I suspect the same thing is true in the US and in Canada and in other places around the world.
The other thing that actually, when I was thinking about around Ukraine, was that it's just kind of interesting how anything about Boris resigning has completely gone out the window now that it's happened.
Yeah, it was fortunate for him, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Putin, could you've waited another month maybe?
Yeah,
yeah.
Although
well,
apparently all those
would be better.
all those letters have been withdrawn from Conservative MPs now, is what we hear anyway. So yeah. I don't know, man. I've done a couple of streams over the last week on the absolute state of the British military, and what I heard today was that the absolute wanks that are Gordon Brown and John Major, two former British prime ministers from different parties supposedly, but there's no difference between either of them really. That they want Putin to face a Nuremberg type war trial, and my first thing to say would be, how are they going to get hold of him exactly? And my second thing, which someone else pointed out on another Discord, was, shouldn't we do Tony Blair first? Which I totally agree with. You know, if you're going to start Nuremberg-style war trials, let's have Tony Blair first, and then maybe do Putin afterwards. I think that.
Well, I mean, the answer is the same to both of those, which is that it's only a war crime if you lose.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. There is no such thing as human rights. There is no such thing as international law. International law is what powerful countries say it will be. That's all it is. Human rights are what the government gives you. And if the last 2 years haven't taught you that, then you're an idiot, in my opinion. You just haven't, you're not able to see things.
Yeah. One of the more disappointing things that's actually come out is one poll that was done was basically found that 52% of people want to waive visa status for Ukrainian refugees, which is just...
One of the things I found strange, George, was that apparently about 20 to 25% of Ukrainian refugees are black or brown, which is certainly not true of Ukrainians.
Now how did that happen?
Yes.
But Duke, what's something you're not considering actually is that if you go back to the ancient DNA of Ukrainian people, they are, that the original people were brown. It's true,
Yeah.
Just
true.
like everywhere else in Europe, So,
well, Anne Boleyn was a black woman, according to the Bias Brainwashing Corporation. I watched.
Consider that, you bigot.
Listen, you could you or anyone else can call me a bigot and a racist as much as you like, and I'll just laugh because it's not an insult anymore. It's like you're based. If someone calls you a bigot and a racist, it means you're based.
I mean, my approach is actually just different to that. I just basically go, okay, and I don't think you should say, yeah, that's really cool, because that's buying their narrative. You should I think the more appropriate thing is basically to say that means nothing to me either way.
Yeah.
I think my favorite humorous response is still, thank you for noticing.
Yeah.
I'm trying really hard. Thank you.
We live in a world where anti-white racism is like rampant everywhere. Everywhere. That all you will find is the only people who are acceptable as bad guys anymore, according to Hollywood, are straight white men.
Well, Russians as of the past few weeks, but yeah.
Yeah, but any straight white men can be like Russians, you know. It's like women are great, trans people are great, black people, brown people, all great. There are no bad ones of any of those people. It's just insane. And how thick do they think people are that we're going to fall for this? I just don't get it.
I mean, it is relevant though that how quickly the narrative has shifted, because it does sort of demonstrate how surface level some of these thoughts are. If literally over the course of 48 hours, it can change from one group being the ultimate evil to someone completely new who was basically not even in the conversation before.
I just want to say one thing. Jonathan Bowden in the chat, who I know, if you either come on or shut up about that. If you want to come on, you're welcome, mate. I'll send you a link immediately. But don't slag other people off who are not you are on, because you're just being an idiot. And you're not an idiot. You're one of my friends. So there we go. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know. What do I think of Putin? I don't think Putin is a savior of like the white race. I don't think Putin is the savior of everything on the right. Putin basically does what's good for Putin, and generally speaking, good for Russia, and probably good on the whole for most ordinary Russians. Now, if we could just get a few leaders like that, I might even be able to get behind them. You know? I just want somebody like Boris Johnson, Alexander Johnson, as he's really known, to do things that are in British interests, not American interests, not the World Economic Forum's interest, not his crappy, not very pretty thought of a wife's interests, but in British interests. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing to note is that Putin, he might not be doing what's in Western's interest, but Russians definitely think he's doing what's in Russians' interests.
Yeah, he's become more and more popular. Yeah.
Everyone keeps saying that the war in Russia is going to become unpopular, but there just doesn't seem to be evidence for that. His approval ratings only seem to go up.
Look, let's put ourselves in Putin and the Russians' positions. Let's say Britain was fighting somebody, and our enemies were sending those people advanced anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles, and they were killing our soldiers and sailors and airmen. What would we think about them as average British guys? We'd fucking detest them, quite rightly.
Yeah. But, yeah, and I mean, it just goes to show to me, like, how much better Russia is as a country in its state of mind, and that they're willing to say, yeah, look, we're going to be poorer, but we've stood up for ourselves. We're not going to be subject to American bitching or Chinese bitching or whatever. We're going to do what we want to do and let the chips fall where they may. I find that attitude far more respectful than Britain basically saying, yeah, we're going to be America's bitch. Because that's basically what we've been doing. It's what we've said since after the Falklands War. We are America's bitch.
Well, I mean, since Attlee, really, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well, since Churchill, really, to be honest. But yeah. But,
I mean, Attlee was when we, possibly under Churchill, but definitely under Attlee, we were actively begging America to be more involved in the world, and we were willing to play lapdog to that. So.
Yeah, and in 1956, when Britain decided to do something for herself, what did the Americans do?
Yeah.
they shout on us from a great height. Now, all right, I'm no Anthony Eden fan, and I think Eden made Italy a British enemy when he didn't need to, but because Mussolini didn't like Hitler at all, really. But if you're going to then get Dwight D. Eisenhower, which many Americans will tell you was a good president, saying to the British, "Oh, fuck you guys," Eden should have just carried on. And even Winston Churchill, and I am not a huge Winston Churchill fan, as everyone here knows, turned around and said, if I'd have been Eden, I wouldn't have dared do Suez, but had I done it, I wouldn't have dared stop. And that was Eden's failure. He should have said to the Americans, well, okay, do your worst. And just have taken over the damn place and then see what the Americans would have done. Give them a fait accompli.
Well, I think part of the problem is that the Americans did start doing that, and the recourse was to crash the British economy with no survivors. So
no, that's exaggerated. You see,
okay.
I've actually looked into this, River, and it's exaggerated. What the Americans could have done to the pound back then was nothing compared with what happened to the pound naturally, in inverted commas, because it was under the Wilson Labour government. In the 1970s.
I'm happy to be wrong about this.
Yeah, I looked at this, mate. I really did. I looked into far more economics than I generally do. And what the Americans would have been able to do in 56 was quite limited compared to that. And also bear in mind, in 56, Britain was vastly America's biggest ally. Like the Royal Navy was huge back then compared to what it is now. It wasn't like it was just a bit. It was like a third of what Western naval forces were. And the British Army and Air Force were also vastly bigger then than they were then now, proportionally. So, yeah. Jonathan Bowden in the chat is saying, what I'm saying is the British were weak. No, I'm saying Anthony Eden was weak and pathetic, not that the British were. I never consider the British people to be weak and pathetic, but Anthony Eden always was. Anthony Eden was a fucking idiot.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would say that the British war effort in either war was weak and pathetic. I mean, maybe there was, particularly in the Second World War, some faux pas. Singapore, hello. But apart from that, I think you would be very hard pressed to say that particularly the soldiers and the people were pathetic and weak. I think that's quite doing a disservice to
my dad, who served in the Suez Canal zone between 51 and 53. He was thoroughly pissed off. He wasn't called up in 1956. He wanted to be. He wanted to get away from his civilian job and go back and do military shit. He was really pissed off. And I think that was most average British people's opinion. But Eden and, Jonathan Bowden and his cabinet were weak as shit and just gave it. Not going to argue against that.
Yeah,
Jonathan Bowden. Hang on, let me just. I beg your pardon, George. Jonathan Bowden. No, I don't have a Wignat view of history, but I think Churchill was not sufficiently pro-British. I think Churchill's American mother, who he loved and adored, was a very, very bad influence on him in terms of a British statesman.
I mean, what exactly is a Wignat view of history? Is that basically the Austrian painter was a good man or something like that?
I guess. Yeah. I mean, which I don't agree with at all.
Yeah, I think you're. No one. I don't think anyone on this panel, let alone most serious people, actually think that. That's.
Yeah. I certainly don't. Oh, look, I tell you what. I had a bloke the other day turn around and say to me, "What did he say? Let me think." Oh, yeah. What's going on now with Putin in Ukraine is very much like Czechoslovakia and Chamberlain. And it's absolute bollocks. Like, Putin is in no way, shape, or form anything like the Austrian painter or Stalin or Chairman Mao or any of these scumbags in history. He's nothing like any of those people. And in addition to which, does anyone now remember that in 1939, Poland was a military dictatorship? Like, it wasn't an efficient military dictatorship like Germany was, but it was a military dictatorship. So again, it's just bollocks. Why did Britain give the big red war button to Poland in 1939, a military dictatorship? It's just, and then of course
it's part of the cordon sanitaire policy. So France in particular was behind Poland as their faction of choice in the Russian Civil War and beyond to try and contain the Soviets, and that's a big part of why they were happy to turn a blind eye to some of their more authoritarian tendencies and the incredible amount of militarization that they'd taken part in, because it was worth it to try and hold off the Soviets. I think that was the general thinking.
All right. Coleman in the chat says Churchill himself despaired of the poor performance of British soldiers in France, Norway, and Greece in 1940 and 1941. Wow. Churchill himself, his military experience was about the same as mine. He commanded about 30 to 40 British cavalry troopers for a few years in the late 19th century. That was his military experience. I probably actually commanded slightly more men in person myself than he did. But anyway, leaving that aside, the British soldiers in France, Norway, and Greece were always enormously outnumbered, were always totally outclassed in the air, and never had enough tanks. Let me give you a really good example. Greece, for example. In Greece, Britain sent the Australian and New Zealand divisions to Greece with the British Armoured Brigade. And the British General Staff, the blokes who are actually paid to work out this ship, turned around and told Churchill that 2.5 British Commonwealth divisions are not going to be able to beat 12 German divisions. And in actual fact, I think the Germans used about 15 or 16 divisions in the invasion of Greece. Now, however much you admire British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers, and they can be some of the best soldiers in the entire world. I was one myself for a while. I'm never going to be 16 divisions against them, and also vastly more air power. And all that happened in Greece, as had already happened in France and happened in Norway, was that the Royal Navy, which was by far the strongest and best of the British Armed Forces, ended up having to evacuate the British Army once again from somewhere in Europe. So I don't give a shit what Churchill said about what British soldiers did or did not do. I mean, it's a bit like Churchill didn't like British soldiers surrendering in Singapore, but he wouldn't send them any modern British fighters, and he wouldn't send them any tanks, because all the modern British fighters and tanks were being sent to Stalin and the fucking Russians via Arctic convoys that cost the Royal Navy loads and loads of warships and cost the British Merchant Navy loads and loads of merchant ships and loads of British sailors. All of that shit was being sent to Russia, wasn't being sent to Singapore. So I don't really give a shit what Churchill said or thought, because he wasn't looking at it from a British point of view. Had I been in Churchill's position in those days, I wouldn't have sent Stalin a single pair of second-hand British Army boots. I would have let the last fucking Russian guardsman and the last Prussian bastard go and kill themselves as far north as possible, and I wouldn't have cared who won. But I'm a British nationalist, not a fucking Russian nationalist. or a world nationalist or anything else. Excuse me, guys, that made me angry because I've seen it so many times. Like Churchill's American mother made him think that America and Britain were the same place, and they're not. Not at all. Never have been, never will be. But in addition to that, he thought it was a great idea to send more British aid to Stalin, much of which, by the way, Britain sent Stalin modern Hurricanes and even Spitfires that used to rot up in Vladivostok because the Russians couldn't work out how to sort them out and didn't like them anyway. But he said nothing to Singapore and then was surprised when Singapore eventually surrendered. The Admiralty said to Churchill, you can't send HMS Prince of Wales, the battleship, and HMS Repulse, the battle cruiser, to Singapore on their own. It's not strong enough. They'll get sunk. And that was even with, there was supposed to be a Royal Navy aircraft carrier with them. But the Royal Navy aircraft carrier ran aground and couldn't go. And Churchill still insisted on sending them. Oh, there'll be a fleet in being and all this bollocks. You can only do a fleet in being where the enemy can't get at you. So yeah, that shit fucks me off immensely. I'm no Churchill fan, honestly. He did more harm to the Royal Navy than most people have ever done. And his actual military experience was commanding a troop of 30 or 40 cavalry soldiers who all he had to do was say, follow me. Now, he was a brave man, don't get me wrong, he was. He fought in enough actions that he was a brave man. But the idea he was something like his great ancestor, John Churchill, was absolute nonsense. You know, he wasn't a Marlborough at all. And the chiefs of the British General Staff spent most of their time in World War II persuading him not to do idiot stuff. So there we go. Sorry, gents. Ran over. Carry on.
No problem. I don't have much to add. I don't have that much love for him either. I don't know. World War II seems like a side with well, just an all-round tragedy. More or less. It's kind of hard to pick a good guy for me.
Well, I mean, look, 1942, I think it was, the end of 1942, there was an American cruiser sent to Cape Town in South Africa to pick up the very last of the British gold reserves. And Churchill said that was okay. Because we got Lend-Lease, which, by the way, even today is described as one of the most generous things that people have ever done in the world. Britain paid off for Lend-Lease in about 2007. 2007, we paid that off. Like, Britain gave enormous amounts of aid to everyone in the Napoleonic Wars who was fighting against Napoleon. Like Prussia, Austria, Russia, you name it. We gave them money, we gave them weapons, we gave them uniforms, everything you can possibly think of. But it was all just given away for free. There was no Lend-Lease, because one of America's war aims in World War II was the destruction of the British Empire, which they absolutely achieved by 1943.
I mean, I always take the view that, like, I don't think Churchill was the greatest guy on earth. I know some people who think he's much more marvelous than I do. But you know, decent right-wing gentleman as well. But, like, I would just say that, like, whether we like him or not, he's a useful fellow, because he, like him or not, he is now the face of British patriotism.
Yeah, I do hate it, and it's false.
Well, you're just going to have to live with it, because, like...
No, I'm going to try and change it.
You don't really have a lot to play with, Duke. I normally... My personal take is that you take what you're given, and, like, I will be pro-Churchill if that's what it takes to save Britain.
On particular issues, maybe, but generally, no. Sorry.
And I'm not
Sorry.
saying that like being pro-Churchill is like the thing that will save Britain. I'm just saying that like
Do you guys you guys might be too young for this, but do you remember? I think in the late 90s there was a BBC poll for the greatest Britain ever.
Too young.
Yeah, you might not remember.
I wasn't even born.
well, all right, I do. And in the 90s there was a BBC poll by Brainwashing Corporation, which back then was not as bad as it is now, obviously, but it was getting that way. There was a BBC poll for the greatest Britain ever born, and there were loads of us who wanted to put Nelson as the main guy, or Wellington, or Marlborough, or a load of other historical British figures. But the person who was absolutely winning so easily back then was Princess Diana, who had recently died, I think. And so a thing went around, that whole poll. Yeah, Alfred the Great, Lumber in the chat. Yeah, lots of people wanted Alfred the Great and loads of these historical real British figures. But the thing that was happening was that who was winning this poll easily at one stage was Princess Diana, who was like basically a royal whore, you know. Like one of her sons is not Charles's son; it's the son of a British Army officer. He even looks exactly like him. But anyway, the one married to the Black American second-rate actress, by the way. But yeah, so there were things started to get sent around this. We've all got to support Churchill because that's the only reason and only way we can stop Princess Diana winning this, which I did. I freely admit I did, because I'd do anything to stop Princess Diana winning the greatest Britain ever born thing. Like, you know, some airheaded whore is not going to win that if I've got anything to do with it. But there we go. So yeah, you have to look at what's really going on, of course. Beowulf was not a Dane, Brian Borrow. Beowulf was an Anglo-Saxon. So there you go. Baron Badger says, "Get off the fence." Yeah, I've been off the fence for a long time, man. But yeah,
I was just going to add, if I recall correctly from that poll, I mean, of course, I wasn't alive for it, but like I've read about it, I believe that Powell was actually quite close to the top, surprisingly enough.
Yep, he was quite high as well. Yeah, Enoch Powell was a bloke who loads of people supported. In the end, though, what basically happened is everyone who wanted to support Nelson and Powell and Wellington and Marlborough, etc., we all went on Churchill's side just to stop Princess Diana winning. That was the only reason. And trust me, you can go look this up. Like there were messages going around on the early internet in those days saying the same thing. Jonathan Bowden, Duke being overbearing again. Jonathan Bowden, if you think I'm overbearing, come on the stream and tell me so. I'm not going to listen to you when you've had a few drinks, which you told me, talking shit in the chat. Come on the stream, mate. Then you can tell me exactly what you think, but you won't, because you're a bit cowardly sometimes, you know, which you accuse other people of being all the time. I'll come on the stream if you put your camera on. No, mate, I am not going to ruin my son's career because you want me to put my camera on.
Dude,
it's not going to happen.
Dude, stop giving ultimatums you know people can't fulfill in order to get out of your own thing. How about you either come on or you don't come on? If you don't want to come on, that's absolutely fine. Like,
mate, I send him a link every week. He can come on anytime he wants. My son's career. Jonathan Bowden, do you have a son? If you did, you might understand how important that is. Brian Borrow in the chat, Venerable Bede. Jonathan Bowden, my fucking son's career. Yeah, my son, I hope, has done his fair share of fucking. But anyway, I mean, fuck me, he's a fighter pilot. You ought to be able to. But yeah, but I don't know, guys. Let's move on to something else. Let's talk about.
I have a question for you, Gene. I'm going to put in private chat. Just.
All right. I'll check it, and if it's reasonable, I'll answer it.
Don't.
Yes.
Help.
The answer to that is yes.
I see.
Right.
I see.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. But
let's give it some reasonable context. Right.
Yeah, Cardamom used the photo of the dog again. Oh, I don't know. I can't show Ruby the cross-check Russell's face again. He's just too handsome. I get too many people who just join this channel because they want to listen and see Rudy. Because he's a cross-check Russell and, like, you know, they're good. But anyway, leaving all that aside, let's move on to something else. P&O ferries and the mass sackings. What do we think about that, gents?
Yeah, so I told you basically that I don't really know anything about the context behind this. Like, here's the thing, like, companies fire people for multiple reasons. You know, they could have been having bad profits. Maybe that area was just not making them enough money anymore. I need to know more. And I think that's just going to be the position I hold on this. I simply don't know enough. But...
Fair enough. What do you think, Rupert?
It might well be a rumor still, but I did see something about supposedly a load of Colombians to replace them, essentially.
Yeah.
For cheaper labor. If that is the case, it's entirely predictable on the back of globalist Britain and all that. But
and the China virus. Yeah.
But entirely undesirable, of course, if that is the case. I mean, if it is just a natural downsizing due to a company that isn't doing well enough to maintain its current level of employment, then that's one thing. But if it's just cost cutting by employing foreigners instead, then obviously that is to be what's the word? Disliked.
Look. Sorry, George, carry on.
No, I mean, all I was going to say is that companies do things all the time for reasons that are just not inherently apparent to us. I don't know anything really about the ferry industry. I mean, I imagine, and I think it's been brought up by Rupert before we went live, that their profits would have naturally fallen because of COVID. Like, I'm not... So, like, I'm not gonna berate them for having to. I mean, I don't enjoy the fact that people are getting fired. I don't think any sane person does. But, like, at the end of the day, it does happen, and some people do need to make. Businesses need to make a profit, or they go out of business. So, yeah, that's what I really say about it.
I mean, it might be relevant to the conversation to ask the question: what were these people actually doing? Because that could determine whether or not there ought to be any action taken over it. Because if we're talking about people who, worked in like a kitchen on the for a cafe on these ferries or something, then that's not as much of a loss, sad as it is to say, for obviously for them, as say actual professional sailors of one sort or another, who have like relevant nautical experience that could be useful to Britain in a more strategic sense. So in that case, it would probably be worth trying to have the government step in to help them out in some way, so that those skills aren't just sort of lost, to reskilling or whatever.
All right. Look, I talked to some people about this at some length before the stream because I didn't know what was going on, and apparently some of the people being sacked are like bar staff, etc. But that it also includes most of the actual seamen, the guys who actually run the ship. And the thing that I would like to point out to people is, like, would you fly on an airliner where the flight crew were the cheapest people the airliner could get? with no nothing to do with their competence, just the cheapest. And what I think many people fail to realize these days is that the sea is really fucking bloody dangerous, even today. And every year or two, there is a huge ferry disaster somewhere in the world with enormous loss of life. And if you're a seaman on a passenger ship, including a ferry, your responsibility is for those passengers, just as the captain's responsibility is for everyone on that ship. And if he fails that responsibility, he can go to jail, and they do even today frequently. And the sailors have to do the same thing. Like, the sea is not the same as the land at all. The captain's word on his own vessel is still law, pretty much, at sea. And I've worked on ships at sea, by the way. And in an emergency at sea, the idea of children and women first is still the law. It's still the law of the sea. And the last people who get off are the crew. Now, I was talking about this on someone's Discord before this stream, not my Discord, someone else's. And I pointed out, I watched a video recently of scuba divers going around a ferry, pulling out drowned children and drowned women from a ferry. And this ferry was like basically rammed by another merchant ship. And because the crew were not competent, many of them just saved themselves. They jumped overboard and got on a raft or a lifeboat. And they didn't, the passengers all panicked, which kind of you expect. It happens all the time. And the crew didn't do anything to save them for the most part because they weren't competent. Now, me, if I was on a ship, and I've worked at sea, like I said, not once, but like several times, if I'm on a ship that's in trouble, I want competent seamen who know their jobs and know their business. I don't want the cheapest people that company can employ. And Britain, in particular, is one of the worst places for this because Britain has huge tides. It has sandbanks and rocks and wrecks. It has very bad weather, including really huge gales. And also some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. And of course, ferries have to go across these shipping lanes. They're not going with them, they're going across them. And the smallest bad thing can go wrong on a ferry. And all of a sudden, you got 2,500, 3,000 people who could all die. Unless everyone on that ship can do their job properly. And to me, the officers and the seamen on the ship, the bar staff, etc., less so, but the actual officers and the blokes responsible for the ship itself, I'd sooner those guys were paid a bit more money and were really experienced and preferably were British. You know, Britain has a well-deserved reputation for producing some of the best seamen in the world. You know, because our waters are so rough, the British sailors know their business. They have to, because you can't do your job unless you do. And fuck P&O, honestly, because what I think is going to happen is they're going to employ a load of foreigners who are going to be the cheapest bastards there are, and I wouldn't want to go on their fucking ships. Because if anything goes wrong, your family is liable to die. And car ferries, for example, are very unstable ships because of the way they have to be to take all the cars and trucks, etc., and lorries. They have these big spaces inside the ship which can fill up with water really quickly and turn them upside down. Least mistake. And there is a big ferry disaster every year or two somewhere in the world, often with an enormous loss of life. And you know, some things are more important than profit. So I think P&O are completely wrong. I don't support them. I mean, in general, I think a British company should employ British workers. But you know, basically on a passenger ship like a ferry, any passenger ship, the officers and crew are the equivalent to the flight crew and the maintenance guys in an airline company. And they should be the best guys for that job, not the cheapest.
Well, I mean, the unfortunate thing, though, is that if there are other companies around doing just the cheapest and people are happy to take that risk, it's still going to put P&O out of business ultimately.
No, don't agree. I think the China virus has given them a big problem, but the China virus is pretty much dead now. You know, like Putin and the Russians have at least killed that off, which is amusing if you look at it the right way. I mean, does anyone believe in the China virus anymore? Really?
Oh yeah, there are definitely still people around who are.
Oh yeah, I look. I was.
But
Yeah, I was shopping on Friday, about a couple of days ago for me, and yeah, I guess somewhere between 7 and 10% of mostly women were still wearing masks, but the vast majority of people have given it up. Adam in the chat says P&O has been in serious trouble for many years. Could be, but you know, working at sea as a seaman is not the same job as most other jobs. It's not. You're responsible for the passengers who are in your care, and things at sea go wrong really quickly. And if you make the wrong decision because you're not experienced enough or you haven't had enough training, people will die. It's not the same as most average jobs. It just isn't. So, you know, Putin's invasion of Ukraine killed COVID, says Jonathan Baldwin. Yeah, I agree. Pretty much has. But COVID was never much worse than a bad flu. It was just enormously exaggerated. And Putin's invasion has, changed it. All right, let's unless either of you guys have got anything to say about safety at sea, let's move on to something else.
No, I don't think I really have tremendously much more to say about that, other than just to sort of reiterate that point that, I mean, it might be unavoidable in the long term if people aren't using their services because it's too expensive. I mean, it's all well and good us saying that it's worth paying the extra cost, but if the consumer isn't doing it, then there's got to be, you got to get passengers on the ship somehow, otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a reason which I've not been commenting that much on this, and simply because I don't know that much. And what I do know is that businesses need a function. Apart from that, I'm just not really gonna say really anymore because I can't. I don't know, frankly. Yeah, but
yeah, fair enough. I look that's fine, guys. To me, I was always happy to fly on British Airways or Qantas or back in the day South African Airways because I knew they had really experienced, well-trained and competent flight crews and really good engineers and maintenance guys. And I think that many people these days don't realize how dangerous the ocean really is, and particularly the seas around Britain. Some of the worst seas in the world. That's why Britain has traditionally always produced such great seamen, because in order to do your job around the UK, you have to be bloody good, because we have some of the most dangerous seas in the world. And I'm sorry, but I don't want to put women and children on a ferry with incompetent crew. And the old saying of pay peanuts and get monkeys remains as true today as it always has been.
That's definitely valid, especially from an insider perspective. But the problem is that passengers may not know, or customers may not necessarily properly weight the risks. So if they're approaching the situation not knowing and just thinking, this company's better, cheaper than the other one, they're probably about as good as each other, right? So you are you're legitimately setting yourself up for disaster potentially.
Yeah.
But without having the government step in, I don't know that there's a way that you can necessarily get around this. It just seems like a potential market failure. But I mean,
Yeah.
To echo George's point, it's just kind of hard to know exactly the details while we're not in the boardrooms having the conversations.
Oh, look, I will once again say two things. Firstly, I think a British company should try and employ British people if they can. P&O is a British company. Peninsula and Orient Lines is what P&O stands for, by the way, going right back into the 19th century. Firstly, they should employ British people where they can, and British seamen have a well-deserved and long-standing reputation for being good at their jobs. And like I said before, if it was just bar staff and people like that they were sacking, I would have less of an issue with it. But they're actually not. They're sacking real guys who are responsible for ramps being closed properly and ropes being done properly, and lifeboat drill and stuff that will get people killed when something goes wrong. And something will go wrong because at sea it always does. And I think in that sort of situation, there's a bigger deal than the profit margins. It just is. And yeah, okay, maybe the British government needs to step in and say, no, you can't do this. Adamant's saying P&O isn't British, hasn't been for a long time. Well, maybe it ain't, but as far as I'm concerned, Peninsula and Orient Lines is a British company and should be a British company, but there we go. Adamant's also saying, and I'm sure this is true, and George might even know about this, there's a lot of good British-owned ferry companies still operating in Scotland.
Yeah.
If you're going to the continent, you're stuck with foreign companies. Yeah, fair enough. But I bet those British-owned companies in Scotland are still using mainly Scottish and British crews, which to me would be a comfort.
I mean, I don't know huge much about it because I'm in the wrong part of Scotland. I mean, the main ferry service is from places like Glasgow Port to Belfast and things like that. And I just don't do that much because I don't go to Ulster that much. Some might say for my sins, but yeah, there is still a reasonable ferry service in Scotland. There's still a very good public transportation service in Scotland. A lot of people lament that ScotRail isn't very good, for example, but it's fucking a lot better than most UK English rail companies, I should say. But that's all I can really say on the matter.
Lee Ham in the chat says Pentland Ferries is an Orkney crew through and through, which would be a good crew because that's another very rough part of the world in terms of the ocean. So if they can work up there, they'll work anywhere. So yeah, I just think we need to point out, because I saw people on this other Discord who were talking about this, that this is purely a commercial making money deal, and it isn't, because as I said, would most people fly on an airliner with the cheapest crew the airliner could possibly get in terms of their flight crew? I don't think they would for the most part.
I have a horrible feeling that a lot of people don't really take that into consideration. They basically just look at the price. Does it take me where I want to go when I want to go there? Yes. Okay. Cool. I'll go.
Yeah. I mean, I don't go on ferries that much, but in terms of thinking about airlines, that definitely I don't think about their relative crashes because that very rarely happens. So I just think about price.
Where does it especially rarely happen, George? With companies like British Airways and the Australian Qantas company, and back in the day, South African Airways hardly ever had a crash. Yeah. In fact, I don't think, touch wood, that Qantas has ever had a fatal crash. They're the only company in the world that hasn't. And that is because they have really experienced and well-trained flight crews and great engineers and maintenance people. and they work to maintain that. Like, I was never worried on a British Airways flight because those guys were the best there were. I mean, they were often ex-military guys and had thousands of hours of flight experience. And like, if there was an emergency, they knew how to the best thing to do. And what I don't think so many people realize today is that the same thing applies at sea. At sea, something can happen in a minute that turns an ordinary voyage into a potential disaster with thousands dead. And the only thing, if that happens, the only thing that stands between you as a passenger and death is a good set of officers and crew. So, like I said, I'm not supporting this P&O thing at all, because once I learned they were actually sacking seamen and not just bar staff, etc. Nah, it's not the right thing to do, mate. The sea is not somewhere where you can just go on profit. You need skill, and you need training, and you even need a bit of courage to be a seaman. Like, you know, if a ship is sinking, it's still true that you do children and women first, and the last people to get off that ship, if they can, are the crew. That's the way it works. Cardamom in the chat, this is not true what you're saying here. You're saying cheap naval cruise is an old practice. I was surprised that the Chinese crews were present on Royal Navy auxiliary ships during Falklands War. All right. Royal Navy ships had long had a couple of Chinese guys on board who were their laundry crew. They did all the washing and stuff in the bowels of the ship. And yes, the Royal Naval auxiliary ships had the same thing in the Falklands, but they didn't perform badly at all. So it's just not true. They were Hong Kong guys, by the way, by 1982. So, yeah, just not true. All right, let's move on to our next subject, which is the absolute wankers that are John Major and Gordon Brown, two former really vile and crappy British prime ministers, want a Nuremberg-style trial for Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. Now, first thing I'm going to say is, how on earth do they think they're going to get their hands on him? But what do you guys think of that one?
Well, I mean, as a bit of diplomatic flair, it throws up more barriers between the West and the newly solidifying East Bloc, I guess. Like the alternate pole. Basically, it means that Putin's movements would potentially be restricted if he were to, want to leave, because there would be the persistent threat that they'd try and arrest him if there were outstanding charges or something. And it would sort of solidify the idea that they don't recognize the legitimacy of Putin's government, and they're going to try and do whatever they can to replace him.
Much the biggest country in the world, let us remind ourselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, if the current posturing is anything to go by, then it's going to include quite a portion of the world's population in this new alternate bloc, including places like
India,
well, China, and potentially India.
Yeah. I mean, India buys 85% of its weapons from Russia, including everything up to warships and submarines.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not covering all the domestic concerns that would be affected by any economic severing of ties. So they have every reason to not want to.
And I don't know about you guys, but to me, looking at this, driving Russia absolutely into the arms of the Chinese Communist Party is the most strategic, the most world strategic nonsense bollocks I've ever seen in my entire life. Of all the things you wouldn't do, that's the number one.
Well, everyone's so, as we were talking about before, everyone's so convinced that this is Putin's Munich moment that they're missing other possible comparisons. Like, for example, if we were to compare it to Mussolini in Ethiopia, because we could potentially just as easily be casting out a potential ally that would be willing to work with the new real rising power in China potentially, and throwing them into China's arms because we don't like that they've done something that in the grand scheme of things is going to be fairly irrelevant to how the world actually goes.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Rupert. Yeah, I couldn't have put that better myself. George, what do you reckon?
Oh, it's stupid, and it's just these people grandstanding. It's a moral grandstand. There's not much else to it. These people are like, yeah, I oppose the bad things on Earth, and I think Putin, I think I actually talked about it on this channel, but I might have not have, that a priest in my diocese, not my priest, who was very based, described Putin as akin to Stalin or Hitler. And, it's just, no. Putin is not throwing people into ovens and cooking them. Let's just get that clear.
He doesn't have gas chambers.
You saying someone is literally Hitler does not make them literally Hitler. So, yeah, there's not much else to be brought up about this. It's all very stupid, and I don't really have a lot of time for it.
I did like the comment on your Discord, George, where I can't remember who made it now, but somebody said, well, look, if we're going to do Nuremberg trials, let's do Tony Blair first.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have a actual war criminal living in this country who is accountable for a war that killed 2 million people needlessly. Why aren't we trying him first? To which you typically get things, you'll get like, well, Iraq was about freedom or some other, what I would describe as pussyfooting. There is an obvious, it's quite obvious that, one, that's not going to happen. 2, it's a very stupid thing to ask for. 3, why are we still listening to John Major?
And Gordon Brown, for God's sake, who sold off all of Britain's gold reserves when the gold price was at the lowest it's ever been.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about Gordon Brown. I would say that Gordon Brown is probably the least bad prime minister of the past 20 years, but that's really not saying much.
No, that isn't saying anything at all. Docastic Draco in the chat says, deceiving Parliament isn't a war crime. Do you know what is a war crime, Docastic Draco, in my opinion, is killing nearly 700 British soldiers for no purpose whatsoever in Iraq and Afghanistan, and making thousands of orphans and hundreds of widows. That's a war crime, as far as I'm concerned. And that's without going on about the Iraqi civilians and the Afghan civilians who got killed, because I don't much care about them, to be honest. But, my idea of a war crime is killing 700 British soldiers for no purpose whatsoever, and making thousands of orphans for no purpose whatsoever. And we now know it is for no purpose whatsoever. We're not in Afghanistan, we're not in Iraq, and nothing has changed in those two countries. That's a war crime, Docastic Draco, in my opinion. So yeah, I'd put Tony. I'd hang Tony Blair personally, with a thin piano wire, preferably. In Minecraft, of course. But But yeah, I have no room for that scum at all. And the idea that, you British prime ministers like that wank John Major, who stabbed Mrs. Thatcher in the back, and Gordon Brown, who completed the absolute destruction of the Royal Navy when he was prime minister, that they can turn around and say, oh, Putin's a war criminal. Get fucked. Putin acts, generally speaking, in the interests of Russia and the Russians. If only British prime ministers did the same thing. Cardamom, what about Jerry Adams and his boys? Yeah, I would have murdered all those guys without even thinking about it. And so should the Irish, actually, because Jerry Adams and the Provisional IRA and their so-called political wing Sinn Féin are total Marxists, and they're the guys who now want Ireland to be totally taken over by black and brown immigrants. So even the Irish guys shouldn't like people like Jerry Adams, really, but, there we go. Jonathan Bowden, what's your opinion of people of uses? Oh, fuck off, Jonathan Bowden.
I do need to get going now, actually. So
yeah, go on, man. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Rupert. There's no problem, man. Go on.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Yeah, go on.
Cheerio, mate.
Jonathan Bowden, you really have had a few too many drinks, I suspect, but there we go. But whatever.
Does this character even drink? Just
Apparently he does. I don't know. I do for sure, but yeah. I like Jonathan Bowden, by the way. He's a friend of mine, but
the mysterious Jonathan Bowden, whose true name must not be named, or maybe he really is the Jonathan Bowden we all know.
Who do you think are working for MI6? Who do I think? Mark Collette for a start.
Well, he's facing,
but absolutely not MI6, because MI6 is British Overseas Intelligence. It's MI5 that Collette is working for.
I mean, he's going to be facing trial soon. Apparently, he might be facing 15 years. I mean, I was hearing.
I can't believe that, mate.
As
he's never gone to jail, as far as I can work out, ever.
First time for everything. All jail goers have the first time in jail. So
yeah, for sure. But I've listened to Mark Collette and his supporters for years, talking about how, for example, Tommy Robertson is a Jewish Israel shill, but Tommy Robertson has been sent to jail 2 or 3 times, I believe. And has actually spent weeks and months in jail. Mark Collette never has. So my opinion is that MI6 is the Secret Intelligence Service, and that's the British Overseas Intelligence Service, kind of the equivalent of the US CIA. But MI5 is the security service, and that's the internal British thing that used to work with Special Branch, which I am told doesn't exist anymore, but I don't believe for a second doesn't exist anymore. And they started off as the Special Irish Branch, by the way, in the 1890s. But I think it's MI5 that Mark Collette is related to one way or another, and that's why he never goes to jail. But that's only my own opinion. I could be totally wrong, because I think he leads people directly into a dead end, and he does it on purpose, because it leads real British nationalist guys into a dead end where nothing can happen. And that's kind of like how I first got involved with all this shit, going right back to Brutus, who I saw someone mentioned in the chat earlier, and the British, what's it called, George, if you remember?
BNP.
No. Where we were doing stuff that was directly against patriotic alternative and all these guys, i.e. Nazi LARPers, basically. I mean...
I don't personally believe that PA was actually a plant.
I think Mark Collette is. And he formed it.
yeah, I disagree with that. I think he was just stupid, and I don't think he knew. Like, I don't think knows what he's doing. I don't think he ever knew what he was doing. And in fact, I think there's quite a lot of evidence that he's a paedophile. But apart from that, like, just a stupid guy, you know. But like, I don't think the world has to be made up of conniving people trying to destroy us, as opposed to, like, you know, Mark Collette was just a stupid fucking dude. Like,
yeah, I'd agree with that. If Collette had not been in 2 mainstream media TV documentaries where he was like kind of exposed as being a whack, and then he was on a show where they said, what would be the 3 Western books that you would save? Now, bear in mind, this is a supposed Englishman. And what were the 3 Western books he would save on this stream that he did? The first one was Mein Kampf. The second one was a book by the dude who used to run the American Nazi Party, I think it was called. Can't remember his name now, but he eventually got killed by one of his own guys who was a nutcase. And the third one was by a supposed doctor who used to be in the Ku Klux Klan and bought his doctorate from somewhere in Eastern Europe. David Duke, Cotterman, quite right. Yeah, they were the 3 books. This supposed the other one was indeed Steve George Lincoln Rockwell, and Collette comes out with this stuff on a live stream, and yeah, it's fine, mate, you know. And look, also Collette.
I mean,
never sent to jail. Never sent to jail.
None of the things none of those saying he likes those things is not a criminal offense, and its fact is just more indicative of a stupid person.
Well, all right, George. What about the British bloke who was sent to jail?
For the terrorism?
4 or 5 months ago, for having a couple of books you could buy legally on Amazon. He didn't do anything.
Yes, but Duke, those were terrorism books. Like, those were books on like how to build pipe bombs and shit.
But you could buy them legally on Amazon.
Sure, you can buy. Yeah, but Duke, like, there is a difference between.
Do you think he deserved 5 years in prison for that?
Duke, come on, man! Like, you ask me these questions. You ask me these questions, like you expect me to answer them. And then when I start to give you an answer, you immediately interrupt me, so I cannot give a constructive answer.
All right.
It's fucking annoying.
Sorry, man. Give an answer.
Right. Okay. So one of those kinds of books is about doing a terrorism attack. The other kind of book is just ideological spurgery. One of those is obviously can lead to an illegal act. The other one is just opinions you have. Like, do you not see the difference?
Sure, but why did he deserve 5 years in jail?
I'm not saying he did deserve 5 years in jail. All I'm saying is that the British government will perceive differently based on the different contents of each book. And, you know, owning a copy of, you know, the Austrian painter's stupid book is, whether we like it or not, you know, it's not a felony. But in British law, owning something about about terrorism is. So, like, that doesn't make Collette a fucking hack. It just means he's stupid and he has a terrible taste in books.
All right. So, are you telling me, George, that like there are no Muslims in the UK who would have some of those books who the British government chooses not to prosecute? Or are you also telling me that there are Muslim child rape gangs in the UK that the British government chooses not to prosecute?
That doesn't change anything about what I'm saying, either way.
Well, except more hypocrisy, but yeah, all right.
Like, yeah, the British law system is hypocritical and stupid. You're never going to find me not saying that. That doesn't mean I think Colette's a hack. I just think he's stupid, and I don't think there's really any good evidence to say
Nah.
he isn't. Just
Yeah.
a stupid, like it's like Dick Spencer. I don't think he's a fucking. I don't think
I
he's a
do.
hack. I think he's a fucking idiot. But things like him saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm pro Biden." Like Biden was obviously fucking uncomfortable with that. Like no one wants this guy. He's the fucking
He's the most
greasy-
popular president in U.S. history. And if you believe that, which is what the mainstream media will tell you, I don't know what to say to you, mate.
I mean, like obviously Biden is not the most popular president in U.S. history.
But he is by the votes that were given in. I mean, cons mostly, but yeah.
Yeah, like sure, but like he's in terms of current day approval ratings, I think he's like one of the lowest approved presidents after 100 days or something like that. But either way, and my point is that like I think these both, I think both Colette and Dick Spencer are useful idiots. Sure, I think that they are some of the worst actors on the right, and I think they're actually one of the big problems of the right wing. One of those problems being that there's not a lot of intelligent people around here, at least high up. But at the end of the day, I don't think that they're fucking working for the government or anything. In fact, I think that just makes it a sadder story, to be honest. Because
I'm going to have to disagree with you a bit about this. I think Spencer maybe. I'm almost certain that Collette is almost certain. Like I did 2 tours in Northern Ireland, and Britain had almost defeated the provisional IRA in the 80s. Like Blair came in and gave in to that vile filth, American president. And basically let all the IRA murderers out of prison. But we were still prosecuting British soldiers for stuff that happened 40 years ago, up until about 2 years ago. But Britain had actually almost won that war. And the main way we did it was that the provisional IRA were completely infiltrated by British agents of one sort or another. And I'm not talking about 007 agents. I'm talking about Irish guys who, like, basically had 2 choices: give information or you're going to prison for 25 years, mate. That was absolutely what had happened. I don't believe Collette would be where he is today if he was not a British government asset of some sort or another. And like I said, Collette and other like Nazi laughers on the supposed right go on about Tommy Robinson, etc. And don't get me wrong, Tommy Robinson's pretty corrupt. Like he's wasted loads of amounts of money on drugs and chicks and all this other stuff that people spend money on. But Collette is only where he is because he's a British government asset. And everyone who joins PA, like you remember that 16-year-old little kid who used to put his face online and then got arrested by the British cops? And everyone used to say, well, why are you putting your 16-year-old's face online? And Collette would turn around and say, well, he wants to have his face online. And after all, he's 16, so he knows what he's doing. Pretty leftist argument to me, but there we go. Collette wouldn't be where he is today if he wasn't some sort of British government asset. Never been in jail. Now you're telling me he may now face jail, but he don't. But he don't get any money away because he's been a British government asset for donkey years. And there was a reason, like the PA which was not a political party, never got registered, never really even tried to get registered, was taking everyone's names and addresses, and PA had people who are well known as pedophiles, etc., in their organization. It was done on purpose. It's a way of destroying actual British nationalists by pulling them into a cul-de-sac from which there is no escape. But that's only my own view, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. George, you got anything else to say on that one? Because otherwise, I got one more thing I want us to talk about.
Yeah, I think we're just going to disagree on that.
That's fine. We can agree to disagree. That's what adult humans do. All right. Let's last subject before we close. The chairman of the, in inverted commas, British Conservative Party is saying that the government's going to back away from this absurd and moronic net zero policy and support British oil and British gas and maybe even fracking. What do you reckon on that one?
Good. I think you'll find me hard pressed to say that there's anything but good. I'm all in favor of cheap, good energy for British people. That's what we're about.
Yeah, I mean, look, do any of us here, and I'm talking to people in the chat here, do we want to see elderly British people die every winter because their choice is heat their homes or eat? I don't think most of us do, given we're civilized men and women.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty straightforward decision for most people. I think it's a great thing. Because I don't think that global warming is all it's cracked up to be. So yeah, there's not much I can really add on this.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, no, I think the human-made global warming is largely nonsense, load of crap. And it's largely made the same way that the China virus stuff was, with computer models. And I'm sure George would know better than me, because he's into this stuff, that the thing with computers is if you put a load of shit in, you get a load of shit out. And I think that's largely what has happened, certainly with the China virus, but also with human-caused global warming as well.
Yeah, I mean, my view is, my view on global warming. I've said a lot of times before. I think it's real. I think it is something that we can actually predict, and I do believe that human beings have contributed something to it. But I don't believe it's either cataclysmic or something that you need to shut down the entire world economy for. Which seems to be the prevailing wisdom.
Don't plants kind of like carbon dioxide?
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Warmings have traditionally been only good for the climate. Roman warm period, medieval warm period, going all the way back to the Cretaceous period and the Cambrian expansion.
Cool. George, you just mentioned something, the Roman warming period, which was over the pretty much from the time Rome became an empire for the next 150 years or so. I think I'd be right in saying.
Yeah, you get these periods so. For example, the medieval warm period also happened just before the Black Death happened.
Yep.
In which Britain grew some of the best wine in Europe, incidentally,
and
things like that. Climates have changed. It's nothing new. It's certainly nothing disastrous. I don't know.
And the Roman warming period, which I've read quite a lot about, because I love ancient Roman and Greek history, but particularly ancient Roman history. Like, it made the world more fertile than it had ever been because it was warmer. So you could grow all this stuff, like olive trees, etc., in places you could not do so even today.
Yeah. And you have to remember that the cooling and the climate change that followed the Roman warm period gave us some pretty nasty things like Attila the Hun, and the Great Migrations, and this little thing you might not have heard of called the fall of the Roman Empire. So so like it's a complicated thing. But I mean, we've seen, for example, we grow more food now than we've ever been able to grow.
Might change though, because a lot of fertilizer stuff comes from Russia. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, but like that's not the sun's fault. So I think it's pretty common sense to see what my views on this are. It's really not the end of the world.
Yep, I totally agree. I totally agree with you, mate.
But even if we are involved, which, based on my interpretation of the evidence, we probably are. But, for me, that's no big deal. A lot of people talk about, oh, look at these islands, they're going to sink. And it's like, well, fucking, I don't care. How many people live there? Like 2,000? Yeah. Do you know how many more people are going to be fed?
None of them have yet been sunk, though, have they? And they've been telling us these islands would sink for like 30 years.
Well, yeah,
and none of them yet have.
Well, none of them sunk. But more importantly, like, do you know how many more people are being fed because of the warm climate? Like,
yeah,
it's great, and I just don't see some huge disaster coming from this. I just don't.
I need to get what's his name on. Oh God, the Dutch guy. He's been on my stream before, and he's quite funny. And he turned around and said to me that, like, all these Dutch greenhouses, you know what they do? They put extra CO2 in them because that makes all those plants grow quicker.
Yeah.
All right, I got one more thing just before we finish.
Sure.
And it is this. I have to go and look this up now because, TERFs, like feminist TERFs. I presume everyone in the chat knows what a feminist TERF is.
Yeah, the term it stands for trans exclusionary radical feminist.
That's right.
So you can think you can think in your head about what that means. In my mind, it means crazy people who get one thing right.
Pretty much.
But
I totally agree. Hang on, I'm trying to do something in the chat. I'm failing dismally. I'm being really boomer. Okay, Lady of Shalott, welcome. Good to see you here. Look, people, there are a lot of TERFs around these days, and they are absolutely against this trans LGBTQ XYZ poison that is destroying Western society. And in that, I totally agree with them. All right, like there's a British lady who does stuff. Can't remember her name now.
J.K. Rowling.
No, not J.K. Rowling at all. No, that wouldn't be one I would support. But there, hang on, let me go and find her name. She was doing some stuff recently about a women's swimming event, and like the real women were all absolutely beaten into the ground by this bloke pretending to be a woman. And I totally get that. Don't get me wrong. Like, you know, these are blokes pretending to be women. They often still have penises and what have you, you know. But we're supposed to regard them as women. But, you know, years and years ago, I think the 219th seeded the 219th seeded world male tennis player beat all of the number one seeded American. All of the number one women seeded tennis players easily in every match they played.
I mean, there is a fascinating video that Coltrane did, who I know you're a fan of.
Yeah, Coltrane's great. Yeah,
in which, I mean, it's years old now, in which he talked about male versus female differences.
Yeah,
and Serena Williams, who was and is probably the best female tennis player of all time. And I'm not going to
enormous as women go, by the way.
And I'm not going to diminish her. She's unbelievably talented.
Not very free, but yeah.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, but like, you know, not everyone. You know, God is balanced in His gifts. But she figured out she was like unequal to something like the 117th best male tennis player.
Yeah,
and then
he was not.
And he beat her something like by something like 3 sets or something. I don't know how tennis works, but it was utterly embarrassing defeat. And like,
I think we're talking about the same thing here. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, it's just, I mean, that's just goes to show you, like, I mean, she wasn't going up against the best male tennis player. She was going up against the 100 or something, and she still lost.
Yep.
I mean, I think that should probably tell you, like, you know, there's nothing against women in it. Like, that's just how people are.
Listen, women are good at stuff that blokes are shit at. They are.
I'll never be able to have a baby through my loins. You know, there is just certain realities about this world, and but that by that same token, I don't think women should not be in sport. I think, you know, women should be like men, should be as healthy, as physically active as possible. I think it's great.
And women's sport is perfectly legitimate, and I have no problem with it. And I even watch the American football stuff where they wear lingerie. But yeah, I do. I watch that. It's kind of cute. But women's sport is not men's sport. If you want the most physically powerful and best people for sport, they're blokes always.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think everyone agrees with this simply by the fact of what people watch. If you want to, like, most people when they watch sport, they want to see the pinnacle of what people do at their best. Yeah. Like, they don't want to watch sport for the hell of it, because then they can just go see their daughter's, you know, most people will still willingly go to see their daughter's hockey match or whatever, happily, but they don't watch professional sport for the same reason they watch their kids go to sport. They watch professional sport because they want to see the very best people. And the fact is that the very best people will always be men, because that's what they're designed for.
Yeah.
Men are designed to be able to be the most dominant, the biggest killers. They're meant to hunt down the prey, etc., etc.
Yeah. That's
just what their job is. And also, coincidentally, and something that feminists won't tell you, die. We are the sex that is meant to die if something goes wrong.
Women will adapt, men will die.
Yeah, you know, which, you know, so everyone has a rough deal in the end of it. It's just life.
I mean, when I was like a young chap at school, I was very fond of women's netball, watching it. But like I watched women's netball for the obvious reason a bloke would watch women's netball, you know.
Yeah, they were wearing short skirts, you know.
Yeah, they weren't wearing shorts. They were wearing little skirts.
No, short skirts. But like, yeah, like,
I didn't watch it for the athleticism. I watched it because they were wearing short skirts and.
Yeah. I mean, I would occasionally watch it because my girlfriend at the time would make me, but like.
But that's not such a hardship, you know.
Yeah, it's really not. It's really not. And you normally get something back in the end. So I mean,
yep.
And yeah, but anyway, enough.
But no. Look. The reason I bring this turf thing up is, like, I was on this chick's YouTube channel the other day, and I made a comment, and I said, "Look, I totally agree," because she was talking about some swimming championships where this bloke pretending to be a woman easily won. All right. But I said, look, I totally agree with you about this. But my problem is that feminists, such as yourself, were totally against all male spaces. And none of you will say a word about women being put into frontline roles in the armed forces that they're totally not suited to. So, look, if TERF said those two things, I'd go along, yeah, all right, then I can be an ally with TERFs. But they don't. And what I got as a reply from not one, but like 3 or 4 of them was that, oh no, all feminists did was ban all male social clubs where absolutely bad deals used to happen that used to affect women. Which is bollocks, because that is not what male social clubs were ever for. In fact, I doubt very much if women were ever fucking discussing those things in terms of their career.
Right. So Gary Garner is talking about actually something that I want to bring up.
Go on.
If I met Blair, I'd refer to her as a woman just out of respect. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. And like, yeah, I probably don't want to cause
I wouldn't, but there you go.
I don't want to cause a commotion to someone's face, and like, I don't want to be a dick. But at the end of the day,
I'm happy to be a dick with a dick.
But at the end of the day, if she asked me, I tell her the truth. I say, no, you're a man. That's what God us. That was the task God assigned you. And like, I don't hate these people because of like how they are. I view them as deeply, deeply sick and mistreated by society.
Yeah.
We don't tell anorexic girls, yeah, actually, you need to get more skinny. We say, no, you're fine the way you are, and you need to be treated. Yeah. But yet, for some reason, we have an exception for this group of society who want to cut off, mutilate themselves, and for some reason, we think it's appropriate to encourage that.
Well, it's even worse than that, George, because what we do is we encourage women, it is almost invariably mothers, who want to turn little toddler boys into little toddler girls, and we say that's all right. It's much more evil than what you were saying.
No, but like, I mean, I'm not talking about like the perpetrators of like the people who aren't themselves afflicted with this. Also, the terms that are more appropriately are perhaps more appropriate is autogynophobia and autoandrophobia, which mean but like, I see these people not as bad people. They aren't. There's nothing immoral about them. They just aren't very well. And like, and there's this is actually something that like I think the right misses out on, is that like a lot of these times these people are human beings. They are just not. Something's gone wrong, and there needs to be a bit more compassion and understanding.
George, look, I don't disagree with what you're saying about the individuals themselves, but how about these couples, and it is mostly women as far as I can see, with like really, really weak cuck gay men as their partner, if they have one, who are turning like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old little boys into fake little girls. I mean, those people I have no compassion for at all.
No,
those people should go to prison for child abuse.
Yeah, I mean, they should have their children taken away from them. But like, I mean, we could talk about those people forever. Like, there was that example of that father who was fighting for custody of his son.
In Texas, yeah. Yeah, in Texas,
Yeah, and
yeah.
the mother was like, I want to chop off my son's dick. Which is like really weird from a mother's point of view, because like, surely as a mother you want your children to have children of their own. That's like the archetypal, that's like the ultimate sign of success as a mother, if
Well,
your children have children.
she's an evil pervert, if ever there was one.
Yeah. I mean, these people are like, I have very little time for those people. And you're never going to find me say otherwise. But like, I'm not here to talk about them. I'm here to talk about people who I think deserve more compassion. Like, you can look at, like, there's like subreddits full of these people, and like, if you skim through it, more than anything, I don't think like I hate these people. These people are stupid. I just feel dreadfully sorry for them and sad. This is like one of the morbid, disgusting things about this society, is that like we encourage illness and we despise healthy behavior, and it's just depressing as hell.
Cardamom in the chat says the level of transphobia in this stream is astonishing. Mate, my level of transphobia is at least 20 times more than I am laying on in the stream. Let me tell you that for a fact. Like, I honestly, I have no room whatsoever for men who want to pretend to be women. None whatsoever. And my level of contempt and hatred for women who want to make little toddler boys into fake little toddler girls, you could not even get. I'd actually, like, that's the one person I'd fucking strangle them to death, because that's what they deserve, those women. And it is always women. It's never blokes. It's always women who want to do that. So
I'm going to plead agnosticism on that. I simply don't know enough about it to say it's always women. I mean, it does seem to be a slightly more feminine trait.
Well, I've never met a bloke who wanted to turn his son into a daughter.
No, but then again,
but there are
vast
vast numbers of women who apparently today want to turn their sons into daughters, and then claim when they're like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, oh no, they've told me they want to be a girl. Yeah. Which is absolute bollocks, because, like, you know, when I was 5, I wanted to be a fucking train driver or a spaceman. It's nonsense, you know.
Yeah. The other thing that is important to remember is, like, things like when someone like says like my opinion on gender. Never ever. This is my task to the people on this stream who in any way align with us. Never ever use the term gender again.
Yes.
It is a made-up academic term.
It's
spawned in the 1950s, spawned by a man called Dr. John Money, who was possibly one of the most evil, fucked men on earth. You can read about one of the things he did, in which a boy who accidentally lost, the doctors botched his circumcision, which of course should not ever happen in the first place, but that's by the by, botched his circumcision. So he suggested that they get rid of his dick entirely and raise him like a girl. And there was a lot of shit that happened. Because he was a twin, and he would to try and enforce the feminine stereotypes, he would make the two brothers go into sexual positions at the age of 6 and 7. And the long story short, this genius who came up with the term gender ended up driving this poor man to suicide. That's an actual thing you can read about. That's online. Look up Dr. Money.
I believe you. Cardamom in the chat says So you're not a fan of the traditional army drag show? No, I would never was. I always thought they were cringe and embarrassing and hated them. To be honest, I always did. I never liked them at all. So there you go, Carlin. That was my opinion. No. I never got it. I didn't, to be honest. Like, I like girls. I think girls are great. They're cute. They're like decorative and
Decorative.
they're decorative. They do good things.
They are an amenity on the wall. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, listen. I watched this video the other day, George, about this really cute little Japanese girl who runs a rickshaw in Tokyo, and this 11 stone, which is kind of like my size, bloke was being pulled around by her, and she was giving him all these really beautiful, polite answers because the Japanese are so polite. And I just thought to myself, well, if only that happened in UK or America, like chicks pulling blokes around in rickshaws, I'd go for that 100%. I like Japan. I have to say, Japan has a lot of good stuff going on, and it still has its own independent culture from Oklahoma.
I mean, all this irrespective, the bottom line is that, like, I think both of us agree that, like, you shouldn't be playing with someone's biological sex.
Not children. Certainly, anyone under 18 should have nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, I mean, that goes without saying.
But we're teaching little tiny toddlers these days, George, like 3, 4, 5-year-olds about transgender stuff and transvestite story hour and all this other bollocks that we do today. And that is child abuse. It just is.
And this is why I would also say that, like, if you can homeschool your children, if you can't, every day take them home and say, what did you learn today? Ask them some questions like, what did you learn today? They'll bring it up, and then you should always have it in their head. And this is only if you have to send them to school, because sometimes people can't homeschool for no fault of their own. And you say, well, look, why do you think that? And then try and give an alternative view and make them not necessarily believe everything they're told at school, which may or may not be true. And that's...
Well, I know for a fact Lady of Shalott is doing homeschool stuff.
Yeah, and more power to her.
Yeah, and there's another Australian channel I follow, the Franklin, who's also doing homeschool stuff. And I would say, like, if you're interested in that stuff, go and look at Lady of Shalott, and then go and look at the Franklin's channel. And you will, I know they've done some stuff together. So, yeah, go and look at that. Because modern state schools are basically trying to brainwash your children from about 3.5 or 4 onwards.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But
anything else to say, George?
I was actually just about to say I need to call it the hour by now.
Yeah, no worries, mate. We're going to finish anyway. I'm going to play us out the tune.
I think it was a good stream. But
yeah, it was interesting. I'm always happy to have you guys on. Lady of Shalott says they want your kids. Yeah, they do, because they want to brainwash them, basically. I'm going to say cheerio. Yeah, so. Go on, mate. Go on. I'm going to play us out of a tune, as I always do. And it was St. Patrick's Day recently, so that's why we're going to get this one. Okay, that was St. Patrick's Day for the Royal Munster Fusiliers, which was one of the very fine old Irish regiments of the British Army, because it was St. Patrick's Day recently, and Erin Go Bra and all that stuff, for anyone who's Irish. George, I would just say to you, if you want your Discord, etc., put in the channel description. Send me the link and I'll stick it in there for you. I will be back on the 22nd on Don the Plebs channel. That's Plebeian Media, I think. In the evening in US time, and we're going to be talking about women in the military again. So that will be the next stream I do. And if not, I will see you next week for Splendid Isolation number 64. Go well, folks.